Hello and welcome to another edition of 10 Minutes with Dr. Tysana. I'm your host, Dr. Tysana Jones from MindWorks Collaborative. This series was created to gather sage advice from educators across the field to shorten the learning curve on hacks for better life and professional information to just connect the dots to improve the learning outcomes for students of all ages. My amazing guest today is Miss Melissa Boston. Her in-depth background on serving students with emotional and behavioral disabilities in her school-based leadership work is what caught our eye when we were scouting for talent for MindWorks Collaborative as we were building our team. She joined our family as the co-founding director of programming. Melissa, will you please introduce yourself and give our community a brief overview of your work and how you've become an expert in working with students with emotional and behavioral disabilities, as well as supporting teachers and school systems in what that population needs?
I'm Melissa Boston, and it's a pleasure to be here with one of my favorites, Dr. Tysana Jones. She is as fabulous in person as she is here virtual. So for me, it was one of those fluke situations that I ended up working, just even discovering the population that I became an expert in. Through a girlfriend of mine, I got a job working at a residential treatment facility, and later really wanted to hone in on my craft and was approached to teach. And I kind of took that idea and ran with it, did pretty well with it, and had an interface with a gentleman who would later become a great mentor of mine and introduced me to the George Washington program, where I am currently pursuing my PhD and in the latter part of the dissertation work. So I am currently here after many years in the classroom and helping other school leaders, and in any way that I can impart any wisdom on anybody, I'd be, more than willing to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you. My first teaching position was at a residential program as well, too. I was at Holy Family Institute. So that was definitely like, oh, this is what's happening over here. Residential is it's just a whole different world. And so I'm really excited that you can just impart some knowledge on us. So when I think about this population, as a school leader and someone totally passionate about these equitable practices, we know what happens with this population. What would you start us off with as far as establishing equitable data collection practices for students with emotional and behavioral disabilities?
So I have a bit of a process. I guess it was going to be 6 points that I was going to try to just stick to around equitable practices and data collection for students with ED. And so that was going to be, first, you need to understand your population. So, the ED population is a specialized population of students. And, it's important for you to really know who you're working with. So know the history of your student. You should know what the diagnosis is. Most definitely, children who have this diagnosis most oftentimes have a lot of history, a lot of rich history that you can pull from. So you want to understand who it is that you're dealing with, because it all starts in the classroom anyway. We can create these larger systems, but we still need to bring it down into the classroom and make those practices exactly that, right? Something that is regular and natural and authentic to how we engage and work with this population of students. In building the relationship or around understanding the population, you can also, do things that intentionally solicit the thoughts and opinions of your students, of their parents, of other stakeholders. So you're not limited to just kind of like this approach where I'm describing in the classroom. From a school perspective, you can really pull it back and take a look at, some of those systemic practices that you engage in. And then third, you want to frame and challenge So you really want to take a look at, establishing some ground rules for how your teams will take a look at data. Because you will then begin to kind of, people will be interpreting data through different perspectives. And so you need to also unpack those perspectives and understand that those perspectives have space in the room. And how do you properly maybe disengage or allow somebody's perspective to be heard, but then also offer up maybe a counter perspective that might be very different from what one of your colleagues is talking about. I mean, here I'm really discussing what it looks like on a school level, right? For teams and for educators to be really in here and digging through this data on a day live action, type of situation. The fourth, you want to set an intention. So how are you going to better, take and use this information? What are you going to do with it? Well, you're going to set an intention for your students. And with students with ED, you want to intentionally maybe take a look at, are students engaging in some of the therapeutic aspects that you have in your classroom, right? Are those therapeutic aspects helping them to engage in alternative, replacement behaviors where they're maybe less aggressive or more inclined to engage? So you have something that's engaging for them. So be intentional. Another educator might, focus on student strengths. So everybody on the team does not have to be looking at, the data and then arriving at the same kind of like action item. We each can have a different action item on the team. And then fifth, you want to choose the right data. So you want to make sure that your assessments are varying. We know that the majority of, especially the standardized assessments, were created for a certain population of students. So you want to consider that you're assessing using varying tools. And I mean, also looking at your rubrics, how you are, gauging how a student is learning or engaging with your material or curriculum. And then last, you want to make sure you strategically, sort your data. You want to make sure you're being intentional around this, around race, gender, IEP, disability category, home language. This will help you get to outcomes for particular groups you might be looking for. So when we're talking about that ED label, you can even extrapolate and pull out exact data on students who have that label and that disability. One of the things that's always stuck with me is, to try to avoid applying students' negative behavior to their academic performance. And that's something for students with emotional and behavioral disabilities that may be hard for you to separate, because those students tend to, may have been more aggressive verbally or physically in your class, intimidating, posturing, or overall just, need a lot of redirection. So there's a lot there with behavior, and you want to make sure that you're not just looking at the child and how they're performing academically with that bias of their behavior. Also, ensuring that there's like a low stress environment for the educators, that's important as well, because working with this population is really challenging. It can be very depleting and it can be very thankless. So I would, be remiss if I didn't say something, especially in these times around, that social emotional approach. I advocate for what you do for your students. You should also parallel that process and make sure that the adults are cared for and looked out for.
Absolutely. What I'm hearing is we have to really change what we're expecting school to look like. The days of everyone doing the same exact thing, the same exact way, that is outdated, and it's been outdated. And so we have to embrace that as educators to truly be innovative, to really meet the needs of kids, period. And being equitable and doing equitable things, you're just making the needs known and making it work for our kids. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. We want children to get something out of being in school, other than just free lunch or just being in school because you're checking off something off the list. It needs to be meaningful. And the equitable practices in delivery of services, settings, and just space. How do we take up space? That matters. So really spending that time learning who your kids even are, looking at how we can improve our settings and our space and our expectations to meet the needs of all of our children the way they need it, and setting these intentions about how we're using data and what we're looking at are absolutely going to have a huge impact on our students with emotional and behavior disabilities, as well as the rest of the school. So we know that if that small group is going to succeed, other people are going to succeed as well. So these are the things that we're looking at. That's how equitable practices work. And we're going to continue digging into some definites and examples of equitable practices that you can take home and you can take to your classrooms in the morning. So thank you all so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again. And thank you, Melissa. And I cannot wait to have you back to share more of what you know about our kids with emotional and behavioral disabilities. Thank you so much.